you have to enable discussion, dissension, arguments, but in a productive way, right? I mean, I think that is also an important thing to how to learn how to work with all kinds of people.
Thanks everybody for joining us for another live recording of the Next Step podcast, where we're talking to SMD grad school alumni, sharing their lessons learned along their career journeys, and hopefully provide some advice for our current trainees who are embarking on their own career paths and graduate school experience. First, before we get into the conversation, I do just want to first introduce myself. I'm Jeff Kozlowski. I am a marketing communications manager here at the University of Rochester School of Medicine and Dentistry, supporting our graduate education and postdoctoral affairs. So the reason why everybody's here today, we have David Simon, who's joining us. He's a microbiology and immunology PhD alum, received his doctorate in 2007. He's had quite a few jobs between then and now. He started out as a postdoc and then worked his way into the federal government contracting space. Ended up at BARDA, which stands for the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority. It falls under Department of Health and Human Services. And there he was leading teams charged in filling national stockpile of therapeutics for smallpox and monkeypox work and things along those lines. And COVID also hit while David was in this job, and he has a lot of interesting things to talk about there. I was on a team called Operation Warp Speed and led daily shipment of Pfizer's COVID vaccine to tens of thousands of sites, making sure everything happened safely, effectively. Work which he received a Presidential Commendation for in 2021. So we'll talk all about that. And very recently, just went from the government to the startup world, where he is now. So we're going to talk a little bit about that transition, and he'll share all of his sort of lessons learned along the way. So let's bring him on. David, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yes, coming in loud and clear.
All right. Yeah, no, glad to be here. Thank you.
So yeah, David, I know I did a little bit of intro there. Anything else you want to hit on as far as, who you are and what you're up to these days?
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I think, my experiences in grad school kind of has taken me, a few different directions that I didn't expect. So, you mentioned going to a postdoc and then realizing just leaving the bench and finding a place within the department. I went to Department of Defense, so first contracting to the government and then becoming a government employee for many years, and then being able to be part of the Operation Warp Speed, so development and getting to lead the development of actually 2 different vaccines for the country, and then kind of this last jump. So if there's any feedback that anybody that's useful for anybody, I'm just kind of excited. As I mentioned to you before, I mean, PhDs in my experience love helping other PhDs. I mean, if you go on to grad school, you want to help other people who are coming out of grad school, because my experience has always been nobody knows necessarily what they're going to do or what is available to be done, I guess, in some ways. And so any if I can provide any help or any lessons learned that somebody takes away is useful, glad to be here and give it.
All right, and let's get into it then. So yeah, reminder, I see we have a few folks tuning in. If you are watching us live, drop a comment in the chat. Let us know where you're tuning in from. We'd love to hear from you. And so, David, let's start with University of Rochester, and how did you stumble on Rochester and ultimately decide that's where you wanted to go for your graduate studies?
Yeah, so I'm originally a product. I was born in Rochester, New York. I went to school at University of Binghamton. I figured I wanted to go to graduate school. I applied to a whole bunch of graduate school programs. I never thought I'd end up back in Rochester, but I really enjoyed the interview process and getting to meet a number of the professors. And it kind of sold me. And the biggest thing was, the first year of rotations, which I really enjoyed, and I assume is still done there and probably is kind of how everyone does it. I don't know. Back then, it wasn't at every university. Some universities, you kind of had to pick your direction. I came in thinking I was going to do microbiology. John Frelinger gave a talk during our first year, as they always did for the first years, and I was sold. And so I wanted to join his lab, jumped into immunology and loved it. So I was down that path, ever since, kind of thing.
And what was it, that kind of, what did you hear from John that, that made you want to get into his lab? And, in some of our conversations leading up to this, you just kind of, you mentioned a few reasons you loved working with him, just kind of in making you think differently, and other lessons you learned from him. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So I mean, everything everything I do in my career I mean, and I've told John this. I mean, I think my lessons from John in grad school have always carried out through my career. And John has, pushes you to think differently and think about programs, and I think that's the goal of a PhD program, is to, PhDs come out with an idea of how to break down problems, how to look at problems differently, how to think about the questions to ask. John's always about, if as you do an experiment, you get ready to do an experiment, what should you think about as you do it? When you get outcomes, how can you make it better? How can you change things? One of the things we do in grad school is you'll do journal clubs or something, and the most common thing is you take a paper and you break it down, you find everything wrong with it, right? How can we find everything wrong with this? How this person did the experiment? And John, for instance, always said, well, for every bad thing in a paper, what's a good thing, or what would you have done differently? I mean, I think it's always about thinking about the next step and problem solving from every angle. And I love that. I mean, I thought John, from my point of view, was always he gave me space to do the experiments and go the direction I want, make the mistakes I was going to make no matter what, but then always brought me back, and we would have really cordial and great conversations about how to make things better, how to move forward and change, or get to the end basically of an experiment or a program.
That's awesome. And so when you completed the graduate studies, you went into a postdoc. So, talk about what that process was kind of like for you. And you mentioned before, you eventually did realize, like, that, okay, maybe this isn't the place for me, but you were in a good spot at National Institutes of Health, I believe. So, you're able to do some things that kind of springboarded you to the next step. So talk about that time a little bit.
Yeah, so John suggested perhaps trying to do something different, broadening my capabilities. So I went to a vaccine, kind of a vaccine development virology lab. Really, it's mostly a virology lab at NIH, and do some development. And within the first 6 months, I realized that being on the bench doing lab work was no longer what I wanted to do. I love the science. Being at the NIH, there are talks at the NIH. There are people to meet and talk about science and think about long-term and big projects. There's always things going on. But I didn't want to, I want to do the science. I just didn't want to do the science, right? I want to be involved in thinking about work, thinking about how my work could impact other ideas, but I didn't want to be on the bench anymore. And I became miserable. I mean, just to be clear, I didn't want to go into the lab and pipette. I wanted to go to a seminar and learn about somebody else's research and what they were doing with it, and think about how that research could connect to other work, or move on. And so that's kind of got the courage to say, okay, I'm done. And then the NIH certainly has a great career center, and they had career fairs, and reaching out to, again, other PhDs who had said, hey, listen, I'm doing this, we're looking for hiring, or if you want to talk. I talked to as many PhDs, former PhDs, as I could, to get ideas, and just search. And then, a few of them actually hit, and, I ended up at a DoD contracting company.
And that that was sort of key for you, because that's where you got a foot in the door, right? You mentioned you got your clearance, and now you have a foot in the door with the federal government, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, in Washington, D.C., there's lots of clearance jobs. PhDs are, again, because how we think and how we think about problems, it's no longer, the disease you worked on, the protein you worked on, or anything. It's really broad. It's how can you think about problems in general as a scientist, and having basic information and understanding, and more importantly, how to learn. But yeah, so once you get the clearance and you could get your first job in the government and the contracting, I was able to move around and feel out and where I would play better. But yeah, that foot in the door is a big deal, and finding that in.
David, so that first job, was that the DARPA role, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency?
No, actually, it was a different role. They
Okay.
sent me to. I got a job with a company that sent me to Charlottesville, Virginia, to work as with a government, a DoD partner, Department of Defense. So I apologize for all the acronyms. That's in government speak. You just get used to it. Department of Defense partner. And then a previous interaction I had with a PhD, they were looking for a job, gave me a call and said, would you come back to Arlington? We need help. We have a position open at DARPA. We need an immunologist, someone with some type of immunology background. But you got to start in 2 weeks. Can you come up to Arlington? And flexibility is a big deal. And I said, let's go. And I went back up to Arlington, Virginia, around DC, which is where I kind of wanted to play, and got to start my career in DARPA, which was, just incredibly awesome.
And talk a little bit about that role, because it was interesting. You mentioned a lot of things can be traced back to your PhD training. They wanted you because they knew, because of your PhD, you could, yes, they wanted the immunology piece, but you can also learn about anything, right? Like that was a big piece in bringing you on.
Yeah, the initial piece was, hey, we needed someone with immunology, and I hit a key word on my resume that I had just given to somebody, just to be clear, right? DARPA is DARPA is very good at advertising themselves. If you go to DARPA webpage, they'll tell you everything they've done, right? Stealth technology and internet and your Siri and everything else can be traced back to DARPA. Basically, they'll take credit for everything. But at DARPA, they have program managers, which are they bring in people very short term that are experts in a field, and they want to solve the world's problems. DARPA is all about, how do I take technology, it might be 30 years, 40 years, or what people consider impossible, and I bring it to now. How can I put together the right team and the right technology to revolutionize for Department of Defense what is going on in science? And while they bring in these personnel, the people who support them are called CETAs. These are personnel like me, PhDs, that come in and say, hey, listen, I can be your bio guy. So you have an idea. I mentioned some guy, a submarine captain once came into my office and said, he was a program manager, said, I want to pitch a program about plant biology. Can you help me? We sat down for a day. We talked about what he wanted to do. In 2 weeks, I want to brief this up to a director and get some and see if we can get some funding. So you're all of a sudden now you have to be an expert in this. Or, work I did on Blue Angel is a really big program, and that has inroads to a lot of technology that's come out of there for antibody therapy development and others. I mean, so it was kind of a come in because you're a PhD and you understand where science can go and how you can learn about science, right? How quickly can you learn, get up to speed, become enough of an expert to understand where a program needs to go and who you need to talk to. That's really a big deal there.
And you mentioned and what I was going to hit on this a little bit later, but it's I think a decent time to bring it up is, you mentioned you're kind of an introvert by nature, but being in these types of positions where it sounds like you're constantly reaching out and then presenting and putting information together in a way that is presentable and makes sense to a different audience. I mean, that you probably got pretty good at presenting because you did it so much, right?
Yeah, and especially my later roles. I mean, and in DARPA, I didn't have to do the presentations, and where I could kind of hide,
Okay.
build. In my career, I couldn't. It feels like I'm jumping through the screen because I'm, I use my hands a lot. I very much am an introvert. Speaking, presenting is not. I'm not natural at it. It's taken me a lot of work. It's exhausting for introverts to kind of do these things, but it's also possible. Like I mentioned, like how did I got really good at presenting documents and slides because I had no choice. Like if I want to do the program and I believe in saying yes to these things, you just push over those mountains. And so, I get myself up. I have a routine. I practice. I think about what I'm going to say and how I'm going to say it as best as I can. But even then, I can come off as awkward because I'm kind of an introvert. But I enjoy doing it. I enjoy doing the work, and wasn't going to avoid it with this career. So just do it more is the answer.
And then, so you mentioned BARDA, which again is the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, part of Health and Human Services. So after your time at DARPA, you transitioned to BARDA, and still similar work in that you brought people together, right? And can you talk a little bit about that
So
work?
yeah, so at DARPA, you kind of had to learn how to be an expert at everything, and it's sort of true at BARDA. But BARDA, you're kind of so I became a kind of a program officer at BARDA, right? So BARDA is responsible for acquiring the necessary therapeutics, vaccines, whatever it is, to ensure our national stockpiles fill with what needs to be, right? Anthrax therapeutics, vaccines, these types of things, smallpox vaccines, therapeutics. And so you're developing, and this is much closer to what I liked about it was it was more of a leading edge. So DARPA's early research, BARDA was very late research, kind of getting through the valley of death of research and getting to phase 3, really getting products approved. And it's you kind of sit with a team, and you lead the team of experts, right? So I wasn't the immunologist. I was the program and I lead, and I had an immunologist, and I had manufacturing experts and regulatory experts and clinical experts and non-clinical experts who I work with as a team. And we're helping work in a public-private partnership with a company that has applied for BARDA funding. And BARDA does large funding because the only way you go through phase 3 and to development is large funding. Non-dilutive funding. And so we're responsible for the oversight and helping provide that company with support and direction and ensuring the government's getting what it's paid for. So you have to know science. You can't be a non-scientist that goes in. It's much more difficult that way. And you learn a tremendous amount. You have to learn basically what the questions are you want to ask, but you're no longer the immunologist, the expert. You need to know how to bring those people together, how to integrate them, how to ask them the right questions to get you the answers you need to help direct those companies. Hopefully that made sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And during this time, we talked a little bit, mentioned Operation Warp Speed at the top of this call or event. So you were there when COVID hit. Talk a little bit about then what that just the situation was, the change for you in your role and what you were asked to do, and ultimately just kind of how things played out.
Yeah. So I was a program officer at BARDA, and COVID hits. BARDA is, we're part of ASPR, Preparedness and Response for the U.S. government. We do advanced development of vaccines and therapeutics, so it was natural that things were going to kind of work with BARDA somehow for vaccine development. Early on, someone gave me a call, leadership gave me a call and said, hey, we see we're having these calls with companies. This is before a lot of things are going on, but you knew COVID was there. Would you mind? Do you have some bandwidth? Could you take some phone calls? Can you work on this? I've always kind of wanted to say yes to as much as I can to try to get those different experiences. So I said yes. That kind of pushed me into kind of moving forward with certain companies as they kind of moved into the BARDA Operation Warp Speed environment, which means eventually when companies came and applied and got funding for vaccines, the Pfizer vaccine, Moderna vaccine, other vaccine developments, they needed leaders to help lead those programs for the government side. So I had already been entrenched through my my development. I took on 2 of those different vaccine programs. So I led the Pfizer and the AstraZeneca programs from the government side, and helped lead those through Operation Warp Speed. So my job became as a program officer in Operation Warp Speed, with BARDA, briefing, General Perna and Moncef Slaoui every day, working with my BARDA leadership to make sure we could push these forward. It was a opportunity of a lifetime. It was massive amount of hours, and every hour of every day was used until those vaccines and after those vaccines were developed and moved out. And it was incredible. And again, I go back to my grad school teaching. Everything I learned about, maybe not everything, but the fundamentals I learned in the PhD world and developing in grad school, I really use those techniques throughout my career, including Operation Warp Speed, how to plan and how to go forward with these different programs. Those are all lessons you learn as a grad student.
I remember last time we spoke, you mentioned it seemed like 20 things a day would go wrong for 3 years straight, and you were constantly solving those problems. And it sounds like similar to life of a grad student, right?
Yeah, problem solving is right. It's when you wake up and you think you know what you're doing that day, and of course you're just waiting for those emails to come in or calls that say this has gone wrong, or we don't understand something, or this agency has questions on certain things. You need to get certain information so things can move, and you were making real life impact. Those decisions had impact on certain spot getting vaccine or the development of a product. And if the decision wasn't made or the risk was taken incorrectly, maybe there's a delay. I don't know if anybody remembers, but we really didn't want to delay anything. So even delaying weeks was a big deal, right? In development world, things can often get delayed weeks, months, years. That could not happen. And so problem solving as much as possible and working with great teams and helping lead great teams in a way in which you have to enable discussion, dissension, arguments, but in a productive way, right? I mean, I think that is also an important thing to how to learn how to work with all kinds of people. I mean, in grad school, you will meet all kinds of people, and often you agree with them, you disagree with them, you don't like talking to some. Those people are all gonna be in your career, in your life, so you might as well get used to it. And each one of them can, you got to talk to sometimes differently or work with differently, and there's ways to disagree in a non-disagreeable manner. And I think that was I'm not sure I learned that in grad school. I realized it. I should have learned it better in grad school, I guess. Let's say that.
So before we move on to your current work, I did mention too that eventually you received a presidential commendation for the work on Operation Warp Speed, a great honor. Can you just talk a little bit about like what was that process like? Like how did you find out, and then what did that all sort of look like?
Yeah, I wish I could say it was a long process or anything. No, I mean, so it happened right before. So Operation, if anybody remembers, the vaccine gets approved in December, right before inauguration of the next administration. There's this period. There's lots going on. And I just remember getting an email one day saying, "Tell me how I actually wasn't even telling me how your name. I just got an email saying you've been put up for or given this award." And it was a number of people within Operation Warp Speed. It was on the White House website, and it was very cool. I don't think there was. I don't know who was involved in any way. I will say that as usual, awards aren't even, and I do think you look at these things, you're like, well, I work with this person, and why am I the list and not their list? That's common. Or why am I not on a list and somebody else is on a list? Like these are things that as you go through your career, you're going to find can be frustrating, or you can feel bad about them. And it's just going to happen. And so I think, one of the things I have learned is making sure that those who have worked hard, as I've been able to move up, making sure the right people are getting acknowledgement. People who work hard need to get acknowledgement. I was one person, I got an award, which of course I could say, well, these 6 or 8 or 12 or 100 people helped me get this award. And you want to make sure that they're being acknowledged as well. It's really an important piece as you kind of move around and move up, is not to forget. None of this is done in a silo.
And I know, as probably during going back to your PhDs, there were probably people that kind of looked out for you, and then, here you are in this position and, continuing to pay it forward, it sounds like.
Absolutely. Yeah. Again, PhDs but not even have to, always want to help other PhDs. We know how hard it is, what to struggle in your brain, forget struggle and anything else, just the struggle of your thoughts. And so, we like to help.
So, you after your time in the government, again, very recently, just within the last 6 months, have joined a startup, which we are not naming yet. The name is not even out there, so it's very fresh. It's new. Tell us, David, then what has that transition been like, and just kind of the work you're into these days.
Yeah, I mean, I think transitioning to kind of the commercial startup world it's again for me, as I measured kind of what I wanted to do next. I wanted to take kind of the next adventurous leap, what would be building from my career and kind of my background, but also kind of what do I want to see? And for me, I'd done all this work from the government side with our private industry partners and public-private partnerships. And I wanted to see it from the other side. I wanted to see, can we do it? How is it done? What are the different thought processes? How do they do it? And so I thought it was a great opportunity that came up after in the last 6 months, and I felt like it would be an adventure, and wanted to kind of make the jump, and I had the opportunity to do so. I think there's always a tendency. There's always a divide in my brain on how other people's work. You stay safe.
Yes.
Keep kind of doing what you know how to do really well, or kind of move. I went from DoD contracting, DoD contractor in Charlottesville, which is a very different job than DARPA. DARPA, there are similarities, but it's a very different job than BARDA. And BARDA, a very different job than OW, Operation Warp Speed, which is a very different job that I'm doing just in a lot of different manners. Now, my work and kind of how I'm senior director of project management. I mean, I still look at how to bring together the right people, drive programs forward, integrate within the company the necessary information in order to make sure everybody knows where we're going, how we're doing it, and get to those major decision points that have to be made. But I'll just be blunt. I'm still learning on my end and still working it out. It's just been an incredible adventure. I'm really excited to be doing it.
Awesome. And one last thing from me, I'm sure there are, and we've hit on some, many lessons learned along the way. But if there was kind of one final piece of advice you would offer, that's kind of top of mind for you from, just all the work and job changes and the stress of COVID and talking to different experts, bringing people together, or everything you've done, going to the startup world. Is there anything you want to leave us with today for our current trainees and those that may that are getting ready to hit the job market, or just going through the grad school process?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we talked previously, I think I probably told you that I got a lot of advice from John, but one of the main
Yeah.
ones was make unique mistakes, right? I mean, I was trying to think about when he first told me this, how I should make unique mistakes in my lab, and it was very early on. I think it was in the first few weeks of being in John's lab, and I was doing an ELISA. I know exactly the moment I was doing an ELISA. And I've done this ELISA maybe 5-6 times, right? It's a very simple ELISA. I believe it was a sandwich ELISA or something. And I coated it before I put the antibiotic, something, and I completely made it. It just didn't work. And of course, why it couldn't have worked? I followed the directions exactly, and I swore I'd follow the directions exactly. And it took him, of course, 30 seconds to walk through it with me, and we could realize what I had done wrong. And he was, the argument is make unique mistakes. Okay, you made this mistake. You understand why it's a mistake, why it didn't work, all these things. Just don't do it. Like, go ahead and make your next mistake, right? It's always going to be like, in what we do, there's lots of trying to keep the amount of errors, red flags, know where the errors are, know where the flags. Everything I do in developing products at any point of the job, like you get better at it because you don't make the same mistakes again, right? You know where you're going. And also hopefully you learn from other people's mistakes, so you don't actually have to make those. And so I like the idea of making unique mistakes. I would just throw on one more, which was, people say, there's no stupid questions. There's always, or no dumb questions. There are always dumb questions when you're things, but when you're at this level of PhD, when you're paying attention and thinking about something and you have a question, you should ask it. A lot of times we find ourselves in these meetings and there's really smart people there and they're just having these in-depth conversations, and maybe you're lost or maybe something doesn't make sense. My career has been built on asking those questions. And like when something doesn't feel comfortable, when something's not right, ask the question. And in a world of project management or development, those questions usually can be very simple and to the point. And sometimes I get embarrassed because they'll just say, well, obviously it's this. And you have to learn to just say, oh, okay, oops. But a lot of times it comes off with, oh, other people hadn't thought of that question or didn't make sense and they didn't want to say anything. Or more importantly, multiple teams or multiple people have just assumptions. And so once somebody says, oh, obviously it's this, 3 other people in my meeting will say, no, it's supposed to be this or this or this, because we come with a lot of assumptions, and you need to be able to ask questions around those assumptions. Our assumptions tend to draw us into, based on our experience, where we think we're going to go, and it's often wrong. And we just need to talk it out. And I think people need to realize how good, ask the question, keep moving. Don't worry about being embarrassed. You'll learn more about it. You'll learn more about everything you want to do. Just keep asking questions.
Yeah, we've had it not on the live stream, but in previous alumni interviews for other projects. I remember another person said, always ask questions. It's more than likely that there is for sure somebody else in the room that has that same question and is either afraid to ask or just doesn't. But yeah, don't be afraid to speak up.
Right. Very important.
And David, that's all I had today. But before we go, if viewers that are watching this now or stumble upon it later on, where can they connect with you? Where's best to reach out?
Yeah, I mean, if people are, want to reach out, I can be found on LinkedIn. You can look me up. I have enough U of R former alumni I'm linked to. I'm sure I'm linked somehow to everybody here. Please feel free to email if you have questions. And look at former U of R people and where they've gone. We've gone so many different places, and there's so many opportunities. If you have, I had no idea what I want to do. If you want to just talk to somebody, you don't have to don't ask for a job the first time. It's not going to work. But I'm just saying, if you want ideas about what to do or how to break into something, just reach out. It's okay. We all have felt that way. We've all
Mm.
felt lost at some point, and so we always needed other PhDs to help us along.
Very much appreciate that, and yeah. So once again, thanks so much, David, for joining us. It's been a pleasure, great conversation. Last reminder here: if you didn't get it, if you think of a question that you wanted to ask and didn't get a chance to while we were live, always feel free to throw them in the comments. We're always monitoring those, and we'll make sure to get an answer for you as soon as we can. And if you haven't yet, check out the podcast on Apple or YouTube and YouTube Music. It's called The Next Step. And until next time, everybody, we appreciate you tuning in, and we'll see you soon. Thanks so much for tuning in to the latest episode of the Next Step podcast. If you liked what you heard, please share with other members of the University of Rochester community or anyone you think could benefit from these career stories. And we wish you nothing but the best in your own career journey. Until next time.